At some point, you've probably sat down, run the numbers, and seen exactly what investing $400 a month, roughly the cost of a car payment, would look like in 20 years. The math was right there. You didn't disagree with it. And then, you didn't do it. Not because you forgot. Not because you couldn't afford it. Something else is happening, and it has nothing to do with discipline. Behavioral economists have spent decades studying exactly this moment. What they found changes the question entirely. You're not uninformed. People today have access to more free financial education than any generation in history. Compound interest calculators, index fund breakdowns, debt payoff strategies, all of it, free, one search away. And yet, according to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, nearly half of Americans between 35 and 54 have less than $100,000 saved for retirement. That's not an information problem. People know. They just don't do. Every quiet wealth habit you've ever read about, automating your investments, living below your means, building net worth instead of chasing income, you already know them. The problem isn't the habits. It's what happens inside your brain every single time you try to build one. So the real question, the one almost nobody asks, is why a brain that clearly understands the right answer keeps choosing something else. The answer starts with something called the wiring mismatch. For years, the explanation was simple. If you're not building the right financial habits, you must not want it badly enough. That explanation is wrong, and it's costing people years. Your brain wasn't designed for the financial world you're living in. It was designed for a world where tomorrow was genuinely uncertain, where consuming today was rational, because you might not be alive to consume tomorrow. Where conforming to your social group wasn't optional. It was survival. Where signaling your status through what you displayed had real concrete value. In that world, the world your brain was built for, every financial instinct you have today was the correct one. Spend now. Match what your tribe is doing. Prioritize the present over the abstract future. That world doesn't exist anymore, but the wiring does. This is the wiring mismatch. Your brain running a 200,000-year-old operating system on a problem it was never designed to solve. This isn't about your character. It's about running the wrong software on a problem that didn't exist when the software was written. December 31st. Someone opens a new budgeting app, sets up an automatic transfer for $400 a month, and feels genuinely good about it. By February, the transfer is paused. The returns were compelling. The math was right. The research says that's not the problem. Economists call it hyperbolic discounting, which is a technical way of saying your brain doesn't believe in your future self, the same way it believes in you right now. In repeated studies on time preference, people chose $50 today over $100 in 12 months, not because they miscalculated, but because their brain genuinely experienced the future money as less real. This is why you can fully intend to start investing next month, and next month never arrives. It's not procrastination. Your brain is doing exactly what it was built to do, treat the present as more real than the future. So what happens when you try to overcome that with motivation? You're using a present tense tool to solve a future tense problem. It works occasionally. It doesn't work consistently. What does work is removing the decision from your brain entirely. Automation. The moment money moves before you see it, you've taken the choice out of the equation. No willpower required, because no decision was ever made. That's the wiring mismatch. Layer 1. Your brain can't experience your future self as clearly as it experiences you right now. So it keeps choosing now. But present bias only explains why the future feels unreal. It doesn't explain why cutting spending can feel like an attack on who you are. Every Friday, someone who decided to stop eating out finds themselves walking into a restaurant with their coworkers anyway. They know the math. They ran the numbers last Sunday, and yet skipping feels less like saving $18 and more like opting out of who they are. So they go. Again. Most people watching that from the outside would say, just don't go. You know it's irrational. Choose differently. But that's exactly the wrong way to see it. What's happening isn't a failure of willpower, it's identity protective cognition at work, which is a technical way of saying your brain treats threats to your sense of self the same way it treats physical threats. Cut the spending, and the alarm goes off. A significant portion of spending isn't about the product. It's about the story the purchase maintains in your own mind and in the eyes of others. When spending is tied to identity, cutting it doesn't feel like saving money. It feels like editing yourself. This is why willpower fails here. You can't out-discipline something that feels like self-erasure. The uncomfortable question isn't, can I afford this? It's, which version of myself am I paying to keep alive? You can't logic your way out of this. The change has to come from your environment first. What you see, who you're around, what gets treated as normal around you. That's the wiring mismatch. Layer 2. Your brain treats identity threats and physical threats the same way. And that brings us to the force that's been shaping your environment, whether you're aware of it or not. Picture this. You're at a family dinner. Someone mentions they just bought a new car. Someone else just moved into a bigger apartment. You go home, open your banking app, and for the first time in months, what you've saved feels small, even though nothing actually changed. That feeling isn't vanity. It's your brain running a calculation. It runs automatically in every social situation, every single day. Robert Cialdini's research on influence showed that humans use what others are doing as a primary decision shortcut, especially in situations of uncertainty. Financial decisions are almost always uncertain, which means you're almost always running social proof calculations, whether you're aware of it or not. Deviating from what everyone around you is doing doesn't just feel unusual. At a biological level, it feels like stepping away from the tribe. And stepping away from the tribe, for most of human history, was dangerous. This is why financial advice that ignores social environment fails. You can read every book, understand every concept, and still find yourself making the same decisions as the people around you because your brain is registering conformity as safety. That's the wiring mismatch. Layer 3. Your brain uses the people around you as the definition of normal, and normal feels safe. The solution isn't to isolate yourself. It's to consciously audit which tribe's definition of normal you're running on. The people physically around you are not your only option for a reference point. So if motivation doesn't work, willpower doesn't work, and knowing better doesn't work, what actually does? You've been trying to solve a systems problem with a motivation solution. That's why it keeps failing. Systems problems need system solutions. The answer from behavioral economics is friction. Richard Thaler, who received the Nobel Prize for this work, demonstrated that behavior responds far more to environmental design than to intentions. The brain always takes the path of least resistance. So the goal isn't to become a better decision maker in the moment. It's to design your environment so the right decision is already the easiest one. In practice, this means automating investments so the decision happens once, not every month. It means removing saved payment information from shopping apps, adding friction to the purchases that work against you. It means unsubscribing from anything that triggers spending you wouldn't make without the trigger, and perhaps most importantly, it means deliberately choosing environments where different financial behaviors are normal. None of these require you to be stronger than your brain. They require you to stop competing with it. That's the whole point of understanding the wiring mismatch. Not to fight the system, but to redesign it. Your brain wasn't broken by bad decisions. It was built for a world that rewarded exactly the behaviors that hurt you now. Present bias, identity spending, social conformity. These aren't weaknesses, they're features. Just features running on the wrong problem. The gap between knowing and doing isn't a character flaw. It's a design flaw, and design problems have design solutions. The question was never whether you knew what to do. The question is whether your environment is doing the work, or you are. There's one variable that predicts almost everything about whether someone actually closes this gap, and it has nothing to do with income, education, or how motivated they are. That's the next video.